What you just witnessed, ladies and gentlemen, was a sea cucumber letting out a massive fart. And what came out was seawater, sand, and for that matter, other matter. Now this is the sea cucumber from above, and you can see this peristaltic motion with which it also moves over the sand. And so these are really interesting animals. These are echinoderms, relatives of the sea urchins and sea stars, and they are marine invertebrates. So all that footage is from underwater, of course, in the Philippines of Negros Island. There is a different species, and because how they feed, they ingest all that sand and then they digest the edible particles in between. They always show these oscillations of their buttholes. So here you have one of these animals laying in the sand, and this one actually has a little passenger. So this is a shrimp which pretty much spends all of its adult life on the surface of the sea cucumber, like on a giant living spaceship. Here the gentleman or lady shrimp is feeding off detritus, which got stuck in the current on the surface of this cucumber. So fascinating animals. As so often these days, there is an environmental story to them too. So they seem to be a delicacy in Chinese cuisine, so they are collected and exported from the Philippines. And there are some areas where they are actually getting rarer. So the University of the Philippines has started breeding tiny sea cucumbers and then seeding the sand in parts of the northern Philippines with these animals. And they're also eaten in the Philippines themselves, where they're typically, I believe, they're chopped up and eaten with vinegar like a quinilao. So it's impossible to swim by these for me and not film the oscillations of their buttholes. Fascinating stuff. Really cool critters. Always a pleasure to see them during a dive. This is a different species here, which has these very interesting mouth tentacles. So this one is not a sand ingester, but it uses these tentacles to graze for, I believe, algae films. In this case, on top of the sponge, and the small thing next to the grazer here, that's also a sea cucumber. So this is a different group. I believe they're the synaptids, and they're much softer and smaller. Now this one at one point had enough of my video light and decided to retract. So amazing animals. Don't forget to check them out on your next dive. So there is another interesting critter which I filmed in Dauin during the last week. So this is a sarcoglossant sea slug, Costasiella, also sometimes called Shaun the Sheep. Lots of S's here, and this very small animal is really struggling in the very moderate current to stay on the algae on which it lives. Now this is tiny, this is the size of a rice grain, and this algae is in fact home to a bunch of other animals. And very often I find these juvenile gobies. This is a fish which is less than 2 centimeters in length, and it's also finding a protected site on this algae, so there would be sand, very hostile, no place to hide, and then once there's this algae you will have these tiny fish and tiny sea slugs. Now this sap-sucking sea slug here has a very interesting biology. It is a kleptoplast. Now you might ask, what is a kleptoplast, and is that even legal? The thing is, this is an animal which takes up the chloroplasts, the photosynthetic organelles, from the algae it is feeding on, and then inserts them in its own intestinal ventricles, so essentially in the dead end roads of its digestive system. And there they continue to perform photosynthesis like in the algae where they came from. So they continue to synthesize sugars essentially from sunlight and CO2. So what a cool trick. Very interesting evolutionary adaptation here. Diving conditions are great. There will be more footage soon, so check back soon and hope you enjoyed this.